Hello and welcome to NARC Live on Wednesday the 8th of April 2026. Coming to you live from Norfolk on the east coast of England with Tammy M0TC.
Hello.
And me, David G3YLA. Lovely to see you all. On tonight's show, Jim Bacon, G3YLA, will discuss the current view of sporadic E and how we can be ready for the new season, which is nearly here. We look back at last Wednesday's AGM and we find out what on earth this is. I have to say, we haven't had many entries of this. And can I give one little clue, Tammy? Just one tiny little clue.
Okay.
Even though it may not look it, it is radio related. Okay? That's all I can say. And the photo was taken by one of our members and sent in to us. So if you have not answered yet or sent us an email with an entry, you've got just about time to do it. If you put it onto Facebook or BATC, we'll be sure to read that when we get to that part of the programme. But first, looking back just a week ago, it seems longer in some ways, last Wednesday at this time was our annual general meeting. In fact, to be precise, at this time last week, we were actually going through the construction competition because for several years now, we've combined the construction competition with the AGM to add a bit of excitement and interest on the night. And the winner of the construction competition is judged that night, usually by the last year's winner. We've got some pictures here which we can show you some of the entries that were there last week. And our winner last year was Martin G7UGB, so he was the judge this year. And these are some of the amazing entries. Now, it doesn't matter how complicated or complex or simple something is. The only thing we say is it's about the construction, it's about how well it's been made. But it was interesting to see such a variety, a spread of designs. I'm trying to remember what all these things were. That was good. That one there. Sorry, Tammy. Yeah, that one there was interesting. Can we just go back? Yeah, the little OLED screen on the left there actually shows with the sun rising and falling.
Oh, cool.
An amazing little design there.
Mm.
And which one was that? I'm trying to read that off there. I only had
maximum smoke monitor.
Oh, maximum smoke monitor. That's right. Maximum bridge monitor. Yeah, yeah. I only had a couple of minutes or not that really to look around, but you could see the wide spread of construction, engineering techniques, and as well as a competition, it was really interesting for people to see what could be made. So thanks to everybody who entered that. Now, after that, we actually had the AGM itself, and we had reports from me as the chairman and also the treasurer. We announced how much the club raised for charity last year. And if those eagle-eyed amongst you who looked at the accounts that Mark had shared, you'll have known that yourself. But we did announce it. And there was actually an audible gasp, wasn't there, in the room? Because last year we did raise a phenomenal amount of money that we've never raised anything like this before. We raised £4,966, plus the club put another £34 in. So it was actually £5,000 that we gave to our charities, the charities that you decided at last year's AGM to support. And that was British Heart Foundation and Prostate Cancer UK. And we had guests from both of those charities to come and just talk a little bit about their work and say thank you, really. So it really was a remarkable amount of money to raise. I don't want to say exceptional, but it seems the wrong word to use. But sadly, one of the reasons we raised so much money is we had a lot of big donations from silent key sales, which are where we sell equipment on behalf of families who've lost a loved one. And quite a lot of money was given to us last year towards the charities, but still, it's an incredible amount of money. We also, last week, there were 5 charities nominated for the club to support in the following year. And again, we do it as we always have, with a show of hands on the night from members there. And this year, they decided to support the Ehlers Danlos Support UK, EDS UK, which Emma was there to talk about. From a personal point of view, and that's the charity that the club, for all its fundraising efforts this year, the donations that you might have given us last year, any donations you give us this year Plus we have fundraising events at things like Barford. We have a raffle at our Christmas dinner as well, and all that money will be going towards Ella's Dan-Loss Support UK. We also are going to do an update to our constitution. Really, it was only when a few things happened towards the AGM that we realised that our constitution, which was originally written a long time ago, 10 pages of it, really needed a bit of an update. Because we are a much larger club now. So that's one of the things that will be happening again fairly soon. Of course, we'll be putting that to all of the members to agree or not before that comes into force. We ordered lots of presentations, or the presentations of awards rather, which is something that we do every year. And if you are a current member, you weren't able to make the AGM and you'd like to watch it, because it's a members only really event, we're not publishing it on our YouTube channel publicly, but if you send me an email and if you are a current member, I will send you a link to be able to watch the AGM yourself if you wish. Also, of course, minutes will be published on the AGM, but we're going to wait until all of the awards have been made and given to people, because all of that will be part of the minutes, and we want to have an element of surprise to a few people who weren't there on the night when we give them their award. So all that's happening. That was from last week's AGM. Now this Saturday, it's back to Koblenz, it's a monthly sked with our twin city of Koblenz. And it's as usual, it's 10 a.m. local time, so now British summer time, 7.123 megahertz, and there's a local talk in on 145. 250, a great opportunity to talk to our friends across the water. It's also a good opportunity really just to see what what conditions are like, in fact, working Europe when you've got a sked like that arranged. So that's from 10 o'clock this Saturday, the usual frequencies. Also quickly to tell you that this Monday night is the monthly Tonight at 8 programme, which Tammy and I host for the RSGB. And this Monday, it's a talk about recycling of waste electronics and batteries by Mark Foreman, G3YLA SA6BID. You can get the link how to watch that just by following that link there on the screen, rsgb.org/webinars. And it's at 8 o'clock this coming Monday. And also, while we talk about the RSGB as well, just like us, they have their AGM in April. And they have something like getting towards 20,000 members, but not many of those 20,000 really engage in voting and things at the AGM. They're really trying to engage a few more people. So if you're a member of the RSGB, our club of course is, but if you're a personal member of the RSGB, they are asking us as a club affiliated to the RSGB to get as many members as possible to engage with the AGM and vote for directors who are going to run in the next year or so, as well as some other routine constitutional things, and hopefully watch the AGM as well. You've got until the 16th of April to do that, and the AGM itself is on Saturday the 18th of April, and in fact we stream it and we do all the video production for them live from this NARC Live studio. So if you want to find more information about the RSGB AGM and you are a member, go to rsgb.org/AGM. And one final notice for you. You probably will have seen in the last few newsletters, and that is the WRTC Championship is coming to this country, and I'm sure you can't have missed this. It's not just coming to this country, but it's coming to this area if you're here in and around Norfolk. Most of the 55 stations will be in and around the Thetford area, which is, just 10-15 miles away from many of us. Now they are looking, the WRTC committee are looking for people to get involved with volunteering. And of course it ideally suits people who are just on the doorstep. This is a reminder, it's an international event once every 4 years, and the UK has got it this year. It will be somewhere else next year. So please do, if you can, think about volunteering or getting involved with WRTC. I don't think you have to really be heavily into contesting to get involved, because it's just one of those world events. Just like, probably speaking for myself, really, the Olympics. I'm not really into sport much, but once the Olympics are on, and especially when the Olympics came to the UK in 2012, you and I got really engaged with it, and I'm sure it's going to be the same for you. So don't leave it. Don't wait until July and then think, oh, it's here and then it's gone. If you want to get involved with it, this is a great time to do it. Just look for the WRTC website. The details and a link are on the latest newsletters and on our website. Okay, Tammy, that's enough chatter from me. Over to you for some little people, please. I haven't seen these, as I often don't.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah.
Have
Let's have a look.
you ever wondered if there's another thing that you can do with the batteries when they're dead?
I was going to put them out for recycling, but I was
Yeah?
too late
Oh,
today. Yeah.
You could turn them into a suitcase.
Oh, I see. Yes. Miniature-calendar.com. New picture every day. Tammy picks one out for us as well. That's very good.
That's cool.
Used to be called a PP3, you know. Now it's an MN1604 or something
Or
like
just
that.
a 9-volt battery.
Well, yeah. But anyway, that's back in the day.
Smoke alarm battery.
PP3s, yes. All right. So do keep in touch with what you're doing. We love to see your pictures. We don't see so many nowadays. I don't know if it's because you're not doing as much or you just don't want to send them to us, but we do love to see a funny picture or a story or something that you've made or something that you've just been doing. It doesn't have to be about radio either. It just keeps everybody connected. radio@dcpmicro.com. If you send them to us by about 3 o'clock on the Wednesday of NARC Live, then we'll be sure to include them in that night's programme. Now, back to that picture. And it was 2 weeks ago tonight when we asked you, what on earth is this? And this is unusual, isn't it? We've never done anything quite like this before. Have we got any entries?
We've got one entry on here.
Have we?
From Martin G6WNN. Says, is this week's What on Earth?
A broadcast RF combiner.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tammy, I'm a bit nearer the
That's
screen
right.
than you, so I can read that off. Okay, so that's Martin's entry. Steve M1HSB says, is it a pipework manifold at the old brewery? I see where you're going there, Steve.
Bob GASTU. This looks like a factory automatic bottle washing and filling machine.
It does, doesn't it? Could be all these things. And Ralph 2M0RHT says, I find it difficult, even impossible, to know how the photographer evaded our security to photograph our distillery. Or is it a water treatment control? So, Tammy, I wonder what this is.
Well,
Are we ready to reveal?
We
Nobody
are.
else entering now. So it was actually, believe it or not,
dun, dun, dun.
hold your breath,
Oh, have I got it? Yeah. It's a dummy
a
load.
dummy load. Now that doesn't really say it all. So I asked Daniel 2E0JNW, took this picture on a visit that he made to the place in Germany, and this is what he sent me. I said, I'd like some details of this really. So the photos of a dummy load attached to a modified Telefunken 100 kilowatt long wave transmitter at the Funkerberg Transmitter and Radio Technology Museum in Königs Wusterhausen near Berlin in Germany. The transmitter was originally constructed in 1946 on this site and underwent a complete overhaul in the late 1960s due to a lack of original spare parts. It transmitted various programs including the Deutschlandsender during its life, mostly on 177 kHz, 185 kHz and 261 kHz, and saw its last use in 1995. Very low frequencies those, of course. So that could explain how big everything had to be. The dummy load is permanently installed and was primarily used to allow maintenance work without having to power down the valves.
Wow.
In other words, they wanted the transmitter to carry on transmitting without actually transmitting, and they needed a dummy load. There we go. Now, I don't think anybody quite got that. I suppose the closest...
We did just have a late entry from Bob, G6PWS, who wondered if it was a giant washing machine or a sewing machine.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I get that. I mean, I guess Martin was closest when he talks about a broadcast RF combiner. But anyway, Daniel thought that'd be a great picture for us. He didn't think anybody would get it, and I think he's right. That is one heck of a dummy load.
It is.
Isn't it? So thank you very much for that, Daniel. Don't forget, when you're out on your travels, the weather's getting better now, you're going out and about a bit more. If you see anything out and about that you think would interest us, it doesn't have to be a tool or a gadget, do take a picture, send it to us for What on Earth.
Well, actually, this week's is the same, isn't it? It's an out and about picture.
It is, yes. You're not allowed to give any clues, remember? You slapped my wrist when I
haven't given
normally do
any
that.
clues.
All right then. Anyway, now you've done a nice teaser,
Yeah.
so let's see it and ask you, what on earth is this? I can see our guest Jim now looking closely at his monitor in the corner of my screen here.
It's a bit of grass.
Well, don't give any clues.
I see some grass.
No, you can't give any clues. That's what you always tell me. So what on earth is this? There is something very specific about this, actually. Very specific. And it's not a trick question. Am I allowed to read that? Going back to the other picture, but I don't want to confuse anybody. So this is the latest What on Earth. Send your pictures to radio@dcpmicro.com. You've got just under 2 weeks to do that, and we'll read out. If you know what that does or what it's for, there is something very specific about that.
What it is.
I think if you ask them what it is, they're going to say what it is. But there's something special about this. Okay, thank you. Now, we just caught at the bottom of our screen there, on BATC, Roger G3YLA he said, when I think the picture of that lovely dummy load was on, he says, Gordon could use that. I don't know, did he really run that sort of 100 kilowatts? Even Gordon doesn't, not 100 kilowatts, and I hope he doesn't on 177 kilohertz as well. But anyway, thanks, Roger. Okay, so before we meet Jim tonight, let's have a look at just what's happening at the club this week. So on Saturday, as I said, we've got the Kaplensked at 10 o'clock on 7.123 megs, or a local talking on 145.250. Don't worry if you don't know if you can get over to Germany. Lots of us don't, and the conditions have been so variable. Just join on though, and if you are localish, then listen on the talking on 2 meters, and then that'll make sure that the net controller is there to bring you in. On Sunday, we've got the GB2RS news at 7 o'clock on GB3MB, and then on Monday night, the Monday Night Net with Steve G3YLA hosting that as always. And then next Wednesday, we're meeting back at CNS between 7 and 9:30 with Bright Sparks for our young members, and also, of course, a social informal for everybody else. And as I said, do keep us informed. Send us pictures, stories, or anything else to use in our next NARC Live. And of course, we're always happy to send this card to anybody that you feel would be cheered by a card from your club. radio@dcpmicro.com is all you've got to do. So now, as we mentioned at the beginning of the programme, our guest tonight needs really no introduction, I think, to most of our club members here. Jim Bacon, G3YLA. Hello, Jim.
Hi, David. Tammy.
Good to see you. And you're going to talk to us about sporadic E. Now, I know for lots of us, sporadic E's been around for ages and ages, but for a lot of people, of course, as well, who just maybe got their licence fairly recently, they won't know what it's about. So I know you're going to talk about it tonight, but just in a sentence or two, just give us a reminder of what sporadic E really is.
Yeah, well, one of the reasons for choosing the content tonight was based upon how quickly people are coming into the hobby. Loads of courses running all around the place, and we're doing ours, of course, as you're involved in them. And you know that there's always a keenness to learn about things. And for many of us in the hobby, we can take ages before we feel confident about certain bits of the hobby that we're dealing with. So this is like a primer of all the sort of propagation modes that you'll be exposed to. But the most quirky one, and the one that I have been involved in for a long while, has been sporadic E. And it's interesting because the first word is sporadic. It really is pretty hard to predict, although we've come a long way in the last sort of 3 or 4 decades in being able to get a snapshot of where we think it is. So sporadic E is a sporadic intensification of ionization in the E layer, and you know that the ionized layers stack up D, E layer, and then the F1 and the F2. Well, the E layer normally behaves as most of them do, affected by the UV from the sun, and when the sun goes down, the ionization stops, and the D layer and the E layer both sort of pretty much fizzle away. But during the day, and sometimes you'll find it happens at night, you can get ionization in the E layer that's very persistent and very quirky as to where it crops up. So my main sort of theme over the last well, 40 years has been trying to look into what might be behind it. So sporadic E is quirky stuff that happens in the E layer, David.
Brilliant. All right. Well, what an answer. Just we hadn't rehearsed that or anything like that. Just shows you what professional you are, Jim. Thank you very much for that. So to everybody at home now, if you're watching this live on Wednesday, the 8th of April evening, you'll be able to ask questions and make comments for Jim straight after this talk. But now let's find out more about that sporadic of most sporadic conditions, but could really help you make the most of radio at this time. Jim, over to you.
Thanks very much. Well, it looks as though some of you out there will already be users of sporadic E, and others will think, oh, this doesn't apply to me, it's something that I'm not going to deal with. Chances are you've already heard it. Chances are you may already have worked through it. So this might provide a bit of background. But this isn't just about sporadic E. We're going to talk about some of the other modes as well along the way. So this is like a real big propagation primer. So it's very much like the idea that when you switch your radio on in the shack, what happens on your session of operating isn't determined really, truthfully, by anything that you do. It's determined by what the ionosphere does, and the ionosphere works in mysterious ways, except that when you get into it, you'll find they're not quite so mysterious, but there are some bits which aren't very clearly understood, or at least they aren't very exactly understood. I think there's a huge amount of work, that goes into research into the ionosphere by professional scientists that radio amateurs only just sort of touch the sides of their work. And that's a shame in a way, because there's a lot of stuff which is of great relevance to us, but also it is quite high-end, difficult stuff to get your head into just on a passing read. So this is a way of helping you into some of those bits of propagation that will make your hobby more enjoyable without making your head hurt too much. So we're coming to the time of the year when sporadic E takes over as the dominant quirky propagation mode, so it's a good opportunistic time to talk about it. So I've called this ruled by tides and bossed by weather, simply because tides come into it and the weather comes into it, and that's the sporadic E bit. But for tropo, for example, as many of you will be aware, we talk of a bit of a lift on. Well, that's sort of more in the weather domain, and the weather is in a very different part of the Earth's atmosphere to where sporadic E lives. So if there's connections, we're going to have to explore some of those. So this is all about what you're exposed to in terms of propagation information in your normal daily sort of operation on the bands. You no doubt, I'm sure you'll all say, yes, I do listen to the GB2RS report every Sunday, and I wait for the propagation report, and there's all sorts of good stuff in there, and there's a lot of work goes into preparing these, and this is kind of a little bit about the background to that. But this isn't stuff that happens by chance. I don't want you to think that you're never going to understand this, or you're never going to really get a grip of what the science is doing. Because the thing about amateur radio is you get exposed to so much good science in a hobby like ours that it's a shame when you don't have time to delve in a bit more deeply to some of the interesting aspects. And this is a way of opening the door a little bit so you can see what's going on. So normally the propagation report will talk about the weather impacts, things to do with high pressure and how that works. It might make a reference to rain scatter, and that's another thing that's weather related, of course. So that's that, and the high pressure, of course, is the tropo bit. And then we have, I usually put in, because I write this is the report bit that I write for the VHF part of it, I do a little bit about sporadic E. Not that it's a forecast, but it's a kind of an overview, heads up if it looks like we've got some of the right ingredients to make it. I'm not saying there will be sporadic E here, and here. I'm saying that this is a good week for the conditions that might lead to sporadic E. And of course, on the GB2RS News, you have the detailed HF assessment of propagation from Steve, G3YLA, that precedes this bit. So within this club, we've got a lot of propagation headbanging going on, which puts you in close contact with the things that control your hobby, other than switching on the rig. So it really is useful to know about this stuff. Anyway, let's have a look. So the GB2RS VHF bit that I'm going to address is basically picking out a few things to address, like tropo, sporadic E, rain scatter, and a website called PropQuest, and then how we draw it all together, and then we'll have a few questions. Actually, I'm going to confess, because I only realised I was doing this talk just before Easter, and I'd forgotten about it. So at lunchtime today, I thought I must get some slides together, or else I'll do just a Q&A. And I thought about the Q&A bit, and it did appeal. But then I thought this was a talk that I did last November, I think, to Felix Stowe, or was it Nuneen? Anyway, I did this talk to a club at the end of last year, and I thought, well, the Norfolk gang haven't seen this yet, and there's some quite interesting sort of links in here for just general propagation, that any newcomer to the hobby, honestly, get into propagation, and you're never going to turn back, because it is such an insight into how the hobby works, and to how your time on the band comes out, you know, whether it's successful or not, whether you work the station you were looking for, both HF and VHF. It's all driven by the state of the ionosphere in one way or another, and or the atmosphere, just in a few things like tropo. But let's have a play. So tropo, we tend to call it tropo, but it just means tropospheric propagation. So the troposphere is the bit of the atmosphere right down near the ground, but not totally near the ground. It goes up to about 10 or 12 kilometres or so, where the aeroplanes fly. So where you see the vapour trails from aeroplanes and the cirrus cloud, that's sort of the top of it. And the weather happens in this bit in between, and you've got a few little mountains down at the bottom here, and you've got weather and stuff going on. And tropospheric propagation is something that happens a lot at VHF and UHF, where signals get involved in ducts because of not quacking ducts, but DUCTS ducts that duct a signal through a sort of almost like a waveguide, I guess, but in the atmosphere, and that's what we're talking about. So this is this is a radar pattern when you've got tropo. This a bit of a lift-on phrase that we use. It's where the radar signal pinging out from the radar gets trapped in a duct and bent down to meet the ground. So these echoes don't move. The radar might have a few little cloud echoes that move across the screen, but all this stuff stays here because it's actually the radar looking at the ground. The signal's gone. Now, that may not be good for rainfall radar, but actually it's quite handy for us as amateurs, because, you know, there might be another station at the other end of that path at ground level, and you'd be getting a signal over to them that you wouldn't normally reach on VHF. So it all boils down to the refractive index of the air changing in a way that causes a signal path to change its direction. And the refractive index is kind of a function of moisture in the atmosphere and the temperature. So if you get a sudden change, you come down the bottom here, sudden change in the refractive index will always be down to a sudden change in either or both of these elements. Usually it's the moisture bit that's the biggest change. So we'll see what to look for. Well, weather data comes from sort of observing it, and you might find back in the old days, these were plotted charts, which we used to do by hand, and you'd have two ink pens, one red and one black, and you'd dip them in an inkwell, and you'd plot these symbols from a whole string of 5-figure number groups. So those weather observations were plotted on a map like this one on the left-hand side, and then an analyst would draw it up and we'd decide where the weather bits were that we wanted to look at, where the fronts were, and so on. And that's how you forecast weather, because you've got to know where things are before you try and move them around to see what's going to happen next. So the big picture, if you strip that away, the big picture is on the right-hand side, which are the forecast charts, which you see versions of on the television, where you've got big things like high pressure or low pressure out in the Atlantic and whatever. And the sort of conditions that we like for tropo are to do with areas of high pressure, because they have a certain parameter about them which causes the atmosphere to form layers. So normally we think of the air as being full of clouds that go up and make rain coming down and everything sort of up and down, but actually most of the atmosphere is going sideways. It's winds going in different directions horizontally, and you get a particular example with high pressure of air that comes down very slowly in the middle of a high and forms layers. It's a bit, I suppose it's more like you can remember from your youth when we had a lot more coal fires than we do now. And you saw the smoke coming out the chimney, and then it would go at a right angle and drift along with the wind. And that layering that happens is also not just effective at smoke, levelling that off, but it's actually quite good at producing contrasts in properties of the air, like temperature and humidity. And that, as we know, is something that involves a refractive index as well. So normally the temperature will decrease with height, but if you get an area of high pressure, which on the right here, you've got an area of high pressure, and the air inside the high over hundreds of kilometers, this is big things. This isn't just the shape of a cloud. This is the size of countries. You'll get a big high, and within that region, air is sinking. So it converges up aloft above the high. So at the top of the atmosphere, the air is coming together, and then you get this slow descent, and then the point at which the descending air reaches down here is going to form a temperature inversion, and that's called a subsidence inversion, because the air is subsiding. And what subsiding air does is it warms. So instead of our temperature falling with height, like this line here suggests the temperature decreasing with height, it starts to rise or remain constant. So it's an inversion. It inverts the normal decrease of temperature. And you can get the same thing happens outside here this evening. The surface of the ground will be cooling because it's radiating energy away to space. And that energy is being replaced a little bit by warmth stored in the soil, but actually the ground will cool more than the air above it, because the air is a good insulator. So this effect is most pronounced at ground level. So you can get a nighttime cooling inversion near the ground. This is the sort of thing which, if you're driving along, say tomorrow morning, if you're out before the milkman in the morning, you'll see little patches of shallow mist and stuff like that. And that's actually the result of a surface nocturnal cooling inversion. So anyway, inversions, temperature inversions, layer the atmosphere, and that means that you can cause the refractive index to change enough to duct your signal, to refract it back downwards, and it will come along in a duct and might travel long distances. You might not hear much in the middle here, but you can get some quite long distances. And you saw on the previous image how big a high was. So the length scale of DX contacts that come from tropo could be the same as the length scale of a high, really. So that means, it wouldn't be surprising to send a signal across the North Sea and into Northern Europe or Southern Scandinavia or even the Baltic. That would be quite appropriate for those sorts of conditions. But to do that, you need to have had the high pressure for long enough and to build up this subsidence inversion to make the contrast that we were talking about. And things can interrupt. A hill will get in the way of that. So if you're on the wrong side of the Pennines or the Scottish Highlands, you might not get your signal across that. So that would effectively limit it. So when you're beaming south, say into Spain, you may come across the Pyrenees or the Cantabrian Mountains along the north coast of Spain. You could find your signal doesn't get much farther than that because it's impacted by the hill. So there we are. So anyway, tropo, because of high pressure, is surprisingly common. We're getting probably some tropo type features over the east coast North Sea area in this sort of weather. Not very marked at the moment, but it is a bit lifty. You know, conditions are a bit up. Hearing stations from northern England on the vertical, on the collinear. So, you know, even what doesn't seem like a full-blown high, even just being on the edge of one can sometimes be enough to do the job. And visualising it, this is a lovely picture. This was a GW station, Ian Collins, who took this picture, and it's just the most fantastic sort of demonstration of what nighttime cooling inversions look like. You get this layer, you get mist and fog in the valleys. We don't do valleys here in East Anglia and things, but some parts of the country they're going into it in a big way, and you can get fog trapped in the valley, and the flat top of the fog. That's a question to ask yourself. Why should that be flat? You know, what's going on there? And it is because of this descent that goes on, because the cool air at night will run down the side of the hill into the valley. There's frost on the grass down here, so it forms that, and it's just like a slopping sort of liquid bath of cool air, which has cooled enough to condense the moisture in it to form the fog. So that's why it's flat. You wouldn't expect, you know, the top of a cup of water to be all up and down bubbly. Well, you would if you heated it, but we're not heating it, we're cooling it. So it's just like a sea surface. And this schematic shows sort of things. So it also suggests that you can have two inversions. So you can have this surface one, and then I don't know if you can see right at the back of this image, there's a layer of cloud, and that's probably trapped under what is the subsidence inversion that the high pressure has made. And that's a much higher thing, but also it is better for long range DX. You won't get much further than up and down the valley with one of these surface inversions that happens because of cool air at night. But this one, you could get across a continent, you know, and it's quite significant. So the important thing to remember when you're operating, and I know a lot of folk, when they first get a license, you'll have your 2 meter handheld. Of course, we all know you should have a CW key and you should be sending CW. But that aside, if you're using a VHF handheld, then the temptation is always from your courses that you do to get as high as you can for your signal to be able to go as far as it can. And that works in practice on most occasions. But when you've got tropo, you don't want to be above this top of the inversion. The big deal with tropo is don't go above the inversion, because you know, you could climb this hill like you normally do on a day for working DX, and you'd find that your lift is gone because your lift is all going this way up and down the valley, and it's because the signal's ducted under the inversion in there, and you pop yourself above it, you're out of the deal. You're just not in the frame anymore. Although you might get something from the subsidence inversion indicated by that cloud layer there, but for this one you'd be out of it. So keep under the inversion, and remember there can be more than one inversion. So this was an interesting thing. Marcus Walden, who is part of the propagation studies group, a very good source of real pithy information is Marcus, and this was one he dug out of a 2 meter contact between a GN and somebody in France. Now, what this, if I explain, this is like a cross section. So on the left-hand side, you've got the southern bit of Scotland, just north of the Lake District, and this brown area on the left is the Lake District Mountains. And then you come down across the across the edge of the Irish Sea and the Lancashire Plain, and you come to the mountains of North Wales. And then you've got the mountains or the moors of southwest England. And then you go across the southwest approaches and the Channel, and you come to Brittany, and there's some hills there. And then you go all the way down the western side of France until you come to the Pyrenees. And the colour coding that you have on this cross section is showing you where the signal, this is a model, this isn't an actual, because of course you couldn't measure this sort of detail in real time on an event. But this is what happens if you model it, and the plot is relating colour to signal strength. So you'd expect to get mega strong signals here, close close to the GM, of course, and then depending upon the structure of the atmosphere, you'll see you can get sometimes stronger bits that actually form a duct. And here's this. Can you see this? I don't know if it shows up with you. Can you see this pale yellow going?
You can see that, I think, quite well,
yeah,
Jim.
So just imagine what's going on here. You're getting at a height of, about 1,000 meters, 1 kilometer up, or 3,000 feet or so, a bit like that cloud we saw in that last picture. So this is probably a subsidence inversion. But here you can see the stronger signals extending as a layer all the way along through a vast distance down as far as the Pyrenees. I mean, that's just incredible to think that the atmosphere can do that to a signal that you normally on 2 meters take to be, well, sort of line of sight plus a bit, plus quite a bit admittedly, but getting much further than Wales, you'd think, well, that's it. But no, there it goes, all the way down to the Pyrenees. And it's all because of this structure in the atmosphere. And that's all because of the ability of areas of high pressure to make these inversions that layer the air, to make these contrasts extend over huge distances. So your new handheld on 2 meters with your new call sign, you could be in some of this stuff. Although I suspect for a path like that, if I'm quite honest, you would be wanting a sort of beam with a bit of gain, and the DX wouldn't be vertically polarized. They'd probably be using beams. So you'd want to peak the path a bit, but it just shows what's possible. And you can get access to some of this stuff online. So there's websites where you can look at the chance of tropo, and you get the color coding showing where the conditions are more favorable, and no color coding suggests that it's a bit flat, normal. And although you've got 2 different sites here, they're using slightly different data or different methods, you'll see that the themes are roughly similar. Depends on the thresholds of their calculations, but you've got this enhanced bit down the east coast of the UK, same here. You've got a big fill-in in the southern and eastern Mediterranean, which you've got on both sides. You've got patchy stuff out over Biscay, which you've got. So there are things that work pretty much across the board, but there's one bit here on this one over Northern Europe, which seems to be absent in this frame. So it could be how it handles. This looks like it might be a bit of a weather front in there, and it's going for slightly enhanced conditions near the weather front, which you can sometimes get. This one is obviously tuned not to be quite so sensitive to that, but anyway, as a general rule, there's several of these sites out there where you can get a good flavour up to 2 or 3 days ahead of what the prospects might be like for some tropo, which is pretty cool. So as a summary for tropo, high pressure's good because, as you've heard, you build an inversion and you layer the air and you make the conditions right for ducting the signal over long distances, tending to go parallel to the isobars around the edge of a high is perhaps better than going through the middle of it. Going through the middle can be a problem because the inversion is then so low that it actually down at ground level, and then everywhere in your profile going up is in dry, clear air. You haven't got this moisture contrast, which is what really drives the whole show. You can get slightly enhanced conditions behind a cold front, which is what I think may have been going on for that that part of Northern Europe that we looked at, that one model got and the other one didn't. New highs that come along between lows. So here's a low dashing away up there. Here's another one coming in across the Atlantic. And in between the two, there's a high. But it's not really a big full-grown making a big lift high. This is just a high that's not a low, if you see what I mean. It's between two lows, so it moves along with it. So there we are. And one of the other things you'll notice is lifts. You often hear people saying, well, dropper is good usually when you've had a big area of high pressure and the pressure starts to fall and the high moves away. And the reason for that is probably, I think, going to be because for us in this country, when a high moves away to the east across Europe, it allows moist air to come in across Biscay and the southwest approaches and get trapped under the inversion. So it brings the moisture in under the inversion. And I did say that moisture is the most important component of the changeover. So temperature has an effect of layering things, but it's the change in moisture across that really alters the refractive index. So you want to get moist air in there underneath this inversion. So now we're going to get to sporadic E. Sporadic E is just the most amazing thing because it's difficult to explain, it's difficult to understand, and yet it can produce the most dramatic operating conditions. You could be sitting there in the shack with not much happening, and all of a sudden you've got a really loud signal from Italy coming through on 6 meters or on 2 meters for that matter. So what's going on there? And over the years I've tried to get behind it a bit, and the reason is because folk would come up and associate it with certain weather types, which is fine. You can build up a sort of a known experience, a lived experience of something like sporadic E, and the ones that you remember would be the big openings, and you probably think, oh well, it was during this hot spell of weather, and it was during this, that, or the other, and you find that after a while you're associating with sporadic E with a certain weather type, and that could be a good thing to do in a way, but it's also missing the real physical reason why it's a good thing to do, which is much more interesting because it'll help you out on those occasions when it doesn't work quite so well, because you'll know why. So let's have a look. This is a schematic really of what I think might be important components of sporadic E. Sporadic E is often written as an E subscript S, so it's E sporadic ionization in the E layer. And there are things involved up here which over the years I've decided are the key elements to build some knowledge up on, which will help you with your operating. So forming sporadic E tends to be a process that happens because of wind shear, and wind shear is just a change of wind, either speed or direction, with distance, whether it's vertical distance or horizontal distance. In the case of sporadic E, it's believed that it's a change of horizontal wind in the vertical, such that in an ideal case, just take it from me for now, if you've got a wind from this direction and a wind from this direction, you will converge ionization into a narrow, dense layer in between the two. Sounds fascinating, doesn't it? If you can do just by getting the wind to blow in different directions, that's pretty cool. So there must be something. Why isn't there sporadic E everywhere all the time? If that's the case, why is it local? Why doesn't it happen every month? So a whole bunch of questions, just when you think you've got an answer to it. So one of the things might be to do with, you think, well, sporadic E happens at certain times of the year, but some people, when they've, on the rare occasions, we amateurs are there just waiting for sporadic E to happen, so we see it all over the place when we're in the season. But if you're running a big research operation, and you've got a big project on where you might be launching a rocket into a sporadic E-patch, you've got to be very lucky to get your research project up and running at exactly the time underneath a sporadic E-patch. I mean, it really is a big ask. But on occasions, they have managed to get a sounding rocket up through the E region and get samples of the ionisation that makes sporadic E. And it's not the same as the gases that exist up there in the E region. The ionisation is ionisation produced when meteors burn up as they fall into the atmosphere. And the reason why that's important is because they're metallic ions of silica, magnesium, iron. And the reason why that's important is because they're relatively long-lasting compared to the normal gases that comprise the E region. So the sun, when it ionises the gases up there, when the sun goes down, the gases are no longer ionised, and you've got a very weak E layer, if one at all. Whereas, if you can get your meteor ionisation, which can last for several hours, many, many hours, and move it into a thin clump, that could last for quite a while. It could certainly last long enough for it to be moved by these different wind directions, because the whole deal about moving it is that think of what you're doing here, you're getting a wind, a neutral wind, that's blowing a charged particle, the meteor ionisation, through the Earth's magnetic field. So if you move a charged particle, we've been doing all this now, I can see, if you're moving a charged particle through a magnetic field, it will experience a deflection. And because the winds are going in opposite directions, the deflection will be in opposite directions. So with a wind of a certain direction at the upper height, it will deflect the ionisation downwards. And with the wind in the other direction from the lower height, it will bring it upwards. So you get in the middle this intensity increasing of the density of the ionisation. And you eventually get a sporadic E-patch. So it then says, well, if this is the case, folks, we need to look at the K index, which is a measure of the properties of the Earth's geomagnetic field. How disturbed is it? Because if the magnetic field is all over the shop, this process won't be very effective. This solar input I put in as a kind of a latter thought, which is about what happens when sporadic E decays, how quickly it decays, may be related to this. So it says something about the lower height and duration of a sporadic E patch, possibly. But that's why it's so interesting, because there's all these things cropping up all at the same time. And the semi-diurnal tides, this is the tides bit, when the Earth spins, no, not one, is this one? No. When the Earth spins, a side of the atmosphere faces the sun. So the sun up there, sun's shining on here, the air warms and expands. And on this side, the other side of the Earth, it's in the shade, it's not warmed and expanded. And when you get differences in the heat of the air at these heights in the E region, it forms a pressure difference which forms a wind. So you get wind regimes that change as the Earth turns, and anything that changes as the Earth turns can be called a tide, like the tides on the sea and so on. And it just so happens that at mid-latitudes, where sporadic E happens to interest us, the dominant tidal wind regime is a semi-diurnal one, so twice a day. So yeah, we've got our wind thing. But one of the properties of semi-diurnal tides is that the wind pattern, the oscillating wind pattern, so in the ideal case, if it went from west to east to west to east, think of the hairdresser's sign in the old days. You used to get this twirling thing. I can't remember which way round they went, but in the semi-diurnal tides, the feature is the nodes, this wind node that's going to do the business, actually slowly descends with time above a given place. So what that says is we should expect sporadic E to slowly descend with time. So you're starting to bring stuff together, it's get more sporadic E, but as you come down, as you go ahead in time, it's coming down. And then you've got to think, how far can it come down before we lose it? Because as it comes down, it moves into denser atmosphere, so it's more likely not to stay ionised for very long. And there's all sorts of issues there to do with that. So the lower height of sporadic E tends to be about between 90 and 100 kilometres above the ground. But it can start as high as about 140 kilometres. So that's quite a difference in height. And if you do a number crunch on the back of a fag packet, you'll see that that makes a big difference in the distance of a sporadic E path, depending on whether the patch is at 140 kilometres or down here at 90 or 100. Anyway, but this semi-diurnal tide operates over the whole part of the globe, because the sun isn't shining just on Europe and not on the Mediterranean. It's everywhere. So if that's the case, why isn't sporadic E everywhere? What's all that about? We should have sporadic E everywhere. If this is all that we need, this stuff up here, but we don't have sporadic E everywhere. We have it in patches. And the bit that makes it come in patches, I think, is to do with wave motion called atmospheric gravity waves. So these are AGW. If you disturb the air by blowing it over something, when you go to the cliff tops at Cromer and the air comes up over the cliff and you get it sort of streaming across the top of the cliff over the car park, and then it bounces away inland, that wave motion that forms is an atmospheric gravity wave. And it's called a gravity wave just because the air molecules, the restoring force, is gravity that wants to bring it back down. Because once you've set the thing in motion, it's gravity that brings it down, and then it will go up and then it will go down again, and so on. You set up a standing wave. And that, we think, is a property of the localness of sporadic E, that you get this contribution from the weather down here at the bottom of the graphic that can propagate up to where the E's region is and modulates this semi-diurnal tide wind flow. And to do that, it has to go through the stratosphere, and the stratosphere winds change quite a bit during the year. The stratosphere has sort of summer season and a winter season, and it's either easterly or westerly, or at least strongly one or the other. So that may have an effect as to what gets through. But what causes these gravity waves? Well, they're caused by weather things. The weather's full of turbulence. It's got turbulence coming out of it everywhere. So you blow a wind over a mountain range like the Pennines, you get all sorts of standing waves set up over the eastern side of the UK because of that. I think it even knocked down a cooling tower at Ferry Bridge one year in a big gale. You can get all sorts of turbulence there. Jet streams, these strong currents of air in the upper atmosphere, jet streams, very powerful. And they produce a lot of turbulence that can initiate these gravity waves that go up to the E region. A sharp wind shear on an upper ridge pattern, that can do it. Thunderstorms, turbulent things, they're like sort of a punch onto the tropicals, the bit at the top of the weather where the cirrus lives. That flat cap of a thundercloud is a very stable layer, but the updrafts, I don't know if you've thought about how strong the air goes up in a thundercloud. It can be over 100 miles an hour, going up, straight up. So that's going to be banging a drum, and that drum will ripple air motion through the top of this interface, and that will go up to the E region. So there's all sorts of ways that the weather down below can communicate with the ionosphere up around the E region. It might be 100 or more kilometres apart, but there are wave motions that can link the two. So that's kind of good, because if if these things become important at producing these gravity waves, then actually you could possibly say quite a bit about where you think sporadic E might happen. You know, if it's going to be a sporadic E day, then look for some of these things that might be causing the trigger. So let's see. We've got upper ridges, this red line here. The UK is here on this map, and you've got a jet stream in green, and another jet stream there, and then a ridge pattern which has a marked wind shear where the wind changes direction. And here it's a northwesterly, and here it's a south. So you can get turbulence there. You can get mountain waves, you get strange cloud patterns, but there's a lot of turbulence. And in Europe, we're really lucky. We've got all these mountain ranges. We've got the Alps, we've got the Pyrenees, we've got the Apennines, we've got all sorts of really good mountain ranges that can cause gravity waves. So perhaps it's not a surprise that we get quite a number of these things. And I mentioned thunderstorms, and look at the flat anvil top of this, and look at the top of the thundercloud that's got such a strong updraft, it's punching through the top there. So that could be a source of gravity waves. And then these slow-moving thunderclouds over Turkey, look at the size of some of these things. And you can see the anvil there, and then you can see the rough sort of cauliflower top bit of the cloud punching through it. And the thing about some of these storms, these what we call supercell thunderstorms in the summer aren't just your run-of-the-mill, you know, looking back over world's mothers, thunderstorm comes along, rumble, rumble, off it goes again, and it's done in about 20 minutes. That, if you think about it, isn't really going to do the job, because it's not producing the gravity waves in the place for long enough to make a sporadic E patch there. It's sort of blurring it out because it's moving too quickly. Whereas these supercell storms that remain in one place for hours and hours and hours and hours, they're the ones that are more interesting. But to be honest, jet streams are the ones that I'd hang my hat on most in terms of previous sort of sporadic E events. So here we've got the problem. We've got this big gap between weather and E's, but it does look as if the turbulence that these AGW, atmospheric gravity waves, makes and propagate up to the E region can sort of colour where the E's happens. So that's kind of good. And we know the gravity waves get up there because if you look at pictures of deep space where people, this one on the left is the exhaust trail of a rocket that was launched, and it went up, and you can see as it goes up into these very high layers, you can see there's a lot of, this isn't because the thing went out of control, this is just the trace that happens as it goes through these different bits of wind shear. And here you can see a wave motion pattern. So there's all, and you know, there's a wave oriented that way, and then there's other waves, higher frequency ones oriented left to right. The atmosphere is full of atmospheric gravity waves. They won't all make E's, but if they're in the right place for long enough, it can be of interest. And you know, the fact is, when you look at either cirrus cloud, or you look at mesospheric cloud, or you look at rocket trails, there's evidence of gravity waves getting up there. So we know they can do the journey. So here's the basic sort of premise behind it. You get a wind from the east at one height overlying a westerly wind, then your ions from your meteors that are burnt up can be brought together to make a dense sporadic E layer. And because I said the trend is that these things, if you stay in one place, the node descends with time. So this bit here, the top one of these, is your first snapshot of it, where the convergent winds have gathered any meteor input, the ionisation. It's not gathering huge chunks of meteors. These aren't rocks that have been brought down. This is just the ionised atoms of the metals that meteors are comprised of. So you've got silica, as I said, magnesium, what's the other one? Iron. Anyway, they're all in here, getting brought together. and as it descends, it's getting more intense. But because we don't see sporadic E covering the whole sort of area, we know that it needs something else to just give it that extra focus, and that is these wave motions from the weather systems down below. And they're, in the meantime, coming up, and sometimes it will capture one of these places and make a patch strong enough and intense enough to give you sporadic E. So there you are, driving along, going into Norwich, and you're listening to Radio Norfolk, like a good loyal Norfolk person, and then all of a sudden an Italian radio station crops up, and that will be sporadic E. And that happened to me once going in on the Dereham Road. I thought, well, this is very broad Norfolk, or it's something else, and it was an Italian talking away, and that was sporadic E, and it was so strong it completely captured the car radio signal. So all I was hearing was this Italian broadcast station. So sporadic E, when it happens, the thing to remember is it happens very strongly. It makes a huge change to the propagation. So although they might form at a fairly high value in terms of altitude, they're not particularly effective up there at that height. And as it comes down, although the intensity increases rapidly, you can find that the height doesn't change much. So you're coming down here, you might get a glimmer, you might just get a flick or a blip, a little pulse of noise from something. You think, what's that sporadic E? And then suddenly the signals come up, and it's because as you get lower down, you've got more of this stuff has been brought together, and the time has given it long enough to make it a thin enough patch. And then there we are, and the FOEs, which is what determines the frequency, it goes shooting up, and that is typically about 100 kilometres up. So we know how to make it, which is cool. And to get to 2 metres, you want an FOEs to be about 14 megs, somewhere up here. This is really good 6 metre and 4 metre territory around here. So what it means is, because we've got a semi-diurnal tide, we've got 2 moments when it might be good. We've got a morning window and we've got an evening window. And sporadic E comes to us as normally 2 patches, but it isn't everywhere. It's only where the weather can give you. You could get a day with all of this stuff here going on, no sporadic E, either because you haven't got the meteor debris coming in, or you've used up whatever came in from a meteor shower a few days before, or a meteor burst, or sudden input of random meteors. You've used up the fuel, if you like, and you could go through the whole day and nothing happens. Or you haven't got any of these gravity waves from the weather coming up and enhancing it. And it's that gives you the sporadic E. So I think it's probably true to say that the tides determine what time of the day you're probably going to see sporadic E more often than not. And the weather determines whereabouts it's more likely. They don't always happen, but whereabouts geographically it's more likely, because the weather will be the geographical controlling influence. So it's complicated, because you can get patches from any of these descending things that show up on an ionosun. You can get a diurnal effect. There might be some readings low down here that exist through a lot of the period, but aren't quite enough to make a good opening until you bring in some new stuff on one of the semi-diurnal tides. And you're always in a race, aren't you, between producing new stuff and bringing it down, and the recombination sort of taking it out at the bottom end. So you bring it down, but it's being eroded away at the bottom by the denser atmosphere. So if you want to play with it, I mean, there's nothing to stop you having a look on any of the websites that show you what the ionosuns look like. And when you get an ionosun, the image that you want is something like this. It has a long, thin line down near the bottom here, which is the FOEs creeping along. And you get the data in the figures on here, and you can see where it is, and you can see the height of it as well. So that's kind of useful. So you can see where you are in the grand sequence of events. So I had a little play looking at looking at what that might feel like when you when you plot it. So here you can see a descending node in the morning and a descending node sort of late morning into the afternoon. So they don't always happen at exactly the right time according to the schematic. It's a combination of many different tidal modes that come together, and there's more than just the semi-diurnal tide up there. But you can see as things come down, the intensity, which is this colour coding, the shading between the blue into the green and the red, shows you that you can get periods when it's more intense. But remember, we're looking here at something that's above a place. Dorbs, this site here, is in Belgium, so it's kind of a good stepping stone from the middle of the UK going towards the continent into southern Europe. And so the fact that you're getting several little blips of intensity here as this descends, it could be they're all separate things, or it could be you've got to imagine them being more like that wave pattern in the cloud and the different ripples going across. Remember we had oh, I don't know why I can't do that. Not sure what's going on there. Oh yeah. So remember we were looking at that, where you had little ripples. So these ripples are the bigger ripples. So those bigger ripples there may be, these here going through the window. So anyway, it's interesting that you can just at home in the shack with your computer download some Ionoson data and plot it and see what's happening. So the height is this solid black line that goes through here, and the color coding is the intensity of the FOEs. So you can plot it a different way. You can show the FOEs here, and you can see that you're getting some very randomly distributed values, low values of FOEs, all the way up to 140 kilometers. So that's at the start of this thing, but it's a low value. And then as it comes down and moves along here, it tends to increase in value of FOEs. Or on this one, in the colours that show it as a morning, the purple ones are the afternoon one, and the orange ones are the morning one. And as you come higher in value, you get less spread in height of the effect of the thing. And I'm experimenting at the moment with combining all those things that you saw on the schematic into something that gives you a rough sort of area where it might be more interesting. So you can just about on any ionosonde in the season, not now because we're in the quiet zone, but we're coming up to it, you'd be able to see all these little descending gravity waves that are showing a falling height of the FOEs and these random fluctuations in the intensity. And the intensity tends to be associated with the falling height. So the falling height business is where this convergent mechanism goes down, and over this period it's gradually getting the stuff together to make a denser event. And this one picks it up really well. It shows in the afternoon, early evening period how it all sort of gets strung out here. As the FOEs increases, you get it to a narrower region. So it fits in, it kind of feels right. And yet, actually, I'll just take your attention before we leave this to see this blue stuff down here. So this is down at 90 kilometers. And this is an overnight thing, which is what's left possibly of the diurnal tide, just lingering away at 90. So you can have an ease layer at 90 kilometers with stuff above it at 130 or 140. So I find it just incredible that you can, you look out the shack window and you've got no idea all this exciting stuff is going on, and it's affecting what you hear on VHF. It's driving the whole show. and yet just by simply drawing a graph, you can visualize it, you can see what's going to happen. So one of the things I'm tinkering with in my mind is whether to convert this bit of software that I wrote to appear on PropQuest, to give us a heads up for a particular station as to how we are in our curve. Is it all coming together in a narrow line or not? So then I thought, well, let's have a look at meteors, and you can see this rmob.org site, meteor website, and the RSGB has a meteor organisation, and there's a group, well, there's a subgroup that's affiliated to the RSGB that's doing a lot of work on meteor measurements and tremendous exciting stuff going on there with receivers dotted about the place. So getting real-time meteor data is really useful. And for the Perseids, this is, was this the Perseids? No, this was June. So this is early June. People always used to say, well, if you're going to work sporadic heat, book leave for the first week in June or the first 2 weeks in June. And that's because you can see you've got some activity here to do with meteor input, which is, so here's the 1st of June up here, and here's the 15th here, and the end of June here. So you can see there are periods where there's more meteor input than at other periods. So you get a little bit of an occasional blip from random meteors outside of the showers, but these are the showers. So that can give you a bit of a boost as well. And then there was a paper I hit upon, which I thought was quite interesting because it looked at just 2 years of meteor input. And so it was a specific research project, and using a meteor radar, and it looked at two years, 2011 and 2012. And then it plotted the median value, because you can see two things. The different coloured crosses are the 2 different years of meteor counts, and a huge spread from one year to the next, huge spread from one day to the next. You know, there's a value up here, or there's a value down here, and it's only about a week apart. So you do get tremendous differences in the amount of meteor debris, which is the fuel of these coming in. And if you just take an arbitrary line, it's possible to have a little game and seeing how does this fit with our sporadic E season. So you could, for example, the one that I prefer, I think, is to set it at about 8,000. This is all. So this isn't just. I'll explain. It's not just meteor showers. This is all the meteors, the random meteors, the whole shebang, all coming in, and how much stuff is coming in on certain days of the year. And the purple line cuts off this period above in the summer, which is equivalent to the 24th of May to the 6th of September, which pretty much captures the sporadic E season in my mind. And then there's a little blip early in the year, which is the 1st to the 15th of January. And there is a spell which is a bit more variable, either late December or early January, when you can get sort of midwinter E's. But I thought, you know, if you wanted a reason why the sporadic E seasons are as they are, it could be this is one of the big determining influences. Quite interesting, isn't it? And then I mentioned in the schematic that these gravity waves that are made by the weather have to go up through the stratosphere. And I said that the stratosphere has a sort of wind regime, which is either easterly or westerly. And well, this is a plot from a website of the zonal wind. Zonal just means going around a latitude band, so it's not meridional up and down. It's going around the northern hemisphere. Zonal wind, and in the northern hemisphere stratosphere, it's the blue colour is an easterly phase, and that goes here. It's middle of May to middle of September, but end of the first week in September, which, as we saw on the previous slide, is pretty much where we go with the meteor input as well. So at the time when we want gravity waves to come up, percolating up from the weather, the stratosphere is in a very different wind regime to what it is during the winter. Because off to the side here, on the right-hand side, we've got the period going through the winter when at our latitudes, we're all in this orangey yellow colour, which is the westerly winds. And they this particular year, last year, changed over about the 16th of 16th, no, towards the end of March, this is. So once you get into April, you're starting to get interested, and it's could be something or nothing. It may be a coincidence, but there may be some filtering effect that happens with these gravity waves. But anyway, so there's all sorts of things which you can look at to give you a clue as to whether we're quite in the season or not. And then there's the K index. So what I've noticed over a period is that ideally it wants to be a fairly low number, below K equals 3, or the KP, which means a planetary average. And if you've already got E's and suddenly you get a magnetic storm and it goes to KP is up to 7 and there's auroras all over, you can get all sorts of stuff like that that complicates it, because the E's is already there. It just means it decays quite quickly and you don't make new stuff. But generally speaking, you want a fairly low value, but it's not always the case. So let's have a look at what a difficult sporadic E opening looks like. And this is a particular opening, and this date I think is hidden from me at the moment. No, I can't see it. Anyway, my eyesight isn't picking it. Is it? Anyway, wherever it is, it's high sporadic E season. Looking at this, big opening here. There's a big little opening there. There's paths crossing here. DX Maps, by the way, is quite a nice program that's up on the web, dxmaps.com, and it allows you to enter your contacts and you can see where the paths cross. And that's a clue in itself as to where there might be sporadic E activity. And then you even get some isolated things crossing. You think, well, how can that be real? What's going on there? Well, if you have a look, the one up to the north near near Iceland is part of this jet stream pattern over here. This one has got a very linear feature in the upper cloud, which is probably to do with the jet stream. This one is over the Pyrenees, which is, we saw a mountain wave component. And this one over here is an isolated thunder activity. So if we pop these on with the jet stream pattern, you'll see they all correlate with jet streams. You've got a strong jet stream that goes down over the Pyrenees, and that's going to cause all sorts of gravity waves. You've got this one over Iceland up to the north here, with mountain waves being set up there with this jet stream. You've got a core of a jet stream over northern Germany and northern Europe, which is the peak point just here, and that's very much a dead ringer for the jet stream. And then the thing over Crimea and Ukraine is also a jet stream. So when you say, well, how is it that you can have jet streams as being behind all these things? You know, there can't be that many jet streams. Well, there can be if you imagine what a truly contorted pattern the jet stream takes on. I mean, it's all over the shop, isn't it? It's not just a sine wave. This is a drunken sine wave. It's everywhere. So it wouldn't be difficult to make up a sequence of paths that involved hops across the different bits of jet streams to get multi-hop paths, aren't there? So just to remind us, we do see signs that the weather can influence, and particularly jet streams, I would say, where we launch effectively atmospheric gravity waves. The reason jet streams are important is because although the winds in the jet stream, well, they're strong, they're called jet streams for that reason. So they might be 150, 250 miles an hour. These are strong flows of air. That is where the speed is. The speed isn't in the movement translating across the chart. So your place where you're making your turbines is fairly fixed in a geographical meteorological sense. You know, it's not moving quickly. So anything that's particularly contorted like this, we call this a meridional pattern, tends to move very, very slowly. So jet streams I tend to favour quite a lot, and thence we get up here, and all these other things come into play to make the ease. So when you combine all of those things, you can come up with a probability function, which is sort of a function of the weather bits and a function of some other things. You can give them different weights and say, well, is that more important than that, and so on. What I've seen after early experiments with this is that very often the paths at a distance suitable for sporadic E to be found, halfway between a location that you've heard, often occur on the edge of strong values of this index. So there's something about the edge of it that seems to be important. And the same, you know, you can apply the rule anywhere. So here we are on the, just off the east coast of the States. And there's another one where the midway point is right on the edge of a jet stream flow. So it could well be that changes that you pick up on the edge of things, perhaps not so much that one, although it's a bit of an edge there, there's plenty of scope for building multi-hot paths. And if you've got some strong edges of features, that can be enough. But each one of these in between, where the signal comes back down to the ground, or in this case the sea, there's going to be some scattering and loss and so on. So multi-hot paths are very, very hard to work unless you've got some good beams and directional antennas. Single hot sporadic E paths within Europe, you could just put a screwdriver in the back of the set and you could pick up a strong signal. I mean, it really is that strong signal. There's virtually no loss at all. It's incredible. It's virtually a line of sight thing. So sporadic E is a really interesting thing to have a look at. And there's another one where it's just on the edge of something. And if you add, and the second hop as well is on the edge. So if you add, if you add a look at where the edge of jet streams are located into your archive of information, you know, go on a website where they plot jet streams, you can be one step ahead of it. Just going to say a few brief words now about rain scatter. I've probably got about 10 minutes left. So is that all right, David?
Absolutely fine, Jim.
Yeah. So rain scatter, for completeness of propagation, it's not going to affect very many of you. So this is a display of a radar. Here's Norwich, and here's something very dark over Wills and others. And this is a huge thunderstorm. Anything that shows up white in its intensity is a real big active thunderstorm. And the red dots you can see on here populating around this, those are lightning strikes. So that's quite an active, very active storm, and that can make a lot of interest for people who want to work via rain scatter. But effectively, what it means is you're talking about the people not even 23/7. It's higher bands than that, so it's properly in the microwaves, and you get this scattering of the droplets, and it's very much above 2 or 3 gigs, so there'll only be a few. But 10 gigs is very popular, and the folk on there use it a lot because I moved this, it sometimes stops me doing this. So why is it okay. What I do during the summer, which in my world means May through to the end of August, I do a sporadic E blog on PropQuest. So PropQuest is a website which currently is it's got the it's got the wet floor sign up on it at the moment because we're doing some work on it. There's one or two glitches which we're fixing, so some work going on there. But hopefully by the end of this month, well, I'm sure we'll have it back up and running again. And during the sporadic E season, the Ease blog tab here, I do a short little note to say which bits of this jet stream pattern look promising. And when you zoom in on it, you'll see some other features like some orangey red shading for thunderstorms. So that's a useful thing. The green shading is jet streams, with the yellow core being the core of the jet stream, which may be well above 100 miles an hour. So good way to launch your gravity waves. And then these blue and red zones are the measure of the change of the value of in effect, the isobars. They're not the contours, but it's saying how quickly the pattern's changing. And when a dramatic pattern is changing, there's going to be a lot of turbulence created in that. And vorticity as well. The amount of spin in the atmosphere comes into it. So if you get some spin, that can sometimes generate these gravity waves. So here's a map which I look at when I'm doing those reports, which gives me a flavour for that. But when you think about why sporadic E is very local and patchy, it's because looking at it from a UK perspective, looking across into Europe, there are, okay, this is an exception because every direction you go, you will meet a bit of a jet stream. But in some places it's too close to you. In other places it's too far away. But usually there'll be some paths cropping up which cross these weather features. The fact that it's not where you are doesn't mean there won't be sporadic E somewhere within Europe. And the other thing is, when you look at how small scale some of this detail is, the vorticity, this spin in the atmosphere, the measure of the spin, is quite incredible, isn't it? Because you've got tiny little thin ribbons of vorticity, of spin. It's a bit like when you're rowing down the river and you look at the whirls and eddies and vortices that come off the end of your oar. You know, it's a bit like that. There's all this stuff going on in the atmosphere as well. It's just that most of the time you can't see it because, you know, there's no cloud in the air, no way of knowing it's there, but it is, and it possibly is generating gravity waves. So if you click on one of these maps to the right, you can get a little bit of a closer view. I think it now brings up just one of these rather than all four. And then the plot of PropQuest, the graphs, shows you when there's a sporadic E patch about. So if you click on that now and again, you'll see every once in a while there's a spike. Well, we haven't got any, at least when I checked earlier today, there wasn't any. I don't know whether I dare do it and take up all my bandwidth. I'll just have a look over there, see what's what. Yeah, well, there isn't anything. There was a little blip at about 1800 this evening, but it didn't get above an FOEs of 3 points, so it didn't get even as high as this one. So we're not really in the system yet. So we want to be halfway through May before we get too excited. But this is where you'll pick them up. This is where you'll see the activity. And if you look at it over a long period, like look at it over a whole month, you can see that for the maximum FOEs, this purple line, it's very spiky. And the highest value at a given time shows that at the beginning of the season, even though these numbers aren't very great, the maximum value that's ever happened, probably towards the end of the month, tends to be more biased towards the middle of the day, with the morning period and the afternoon period not so widely reported. The red line is the FOF2, which is just the F layer, which is behaving fairly normally. But you go into the middle of a season, and then you've got a much stronger peak in the afternoon, and you've got another one sort of coming up in the morning, and it has a dip in the middle of the day. So the behaviour of E's changes according to where you are in the season. So what I do, I look at all this stuff when I'm about to write the notes for GBT. Oh, actually, it's Wednesday today, so I'll do one later on. So I'm looking at all this stuff, and in the sporadic e-season, I'll be getting excited about that as well. But outside of sporadic e-season, I won't be getting too excited. It'll just get a throwaway look. So when I do it on a Wednesday, you've got to bear in mind I'm writing about what's going to happen in the announcement starting on Sunday when it's read out and going ahead for the rest of next week. So this is a full sort of 10-day span I'm trying to get a flavour of. So there's going to be errors as you go through it. There's going to be bits where it isn't quite right, but that's because the models, the meteorology, we can't be accurate to that degree at 10 days' time. I mean, a low on a chart in 10 days' time may not actually have formed. It won't be there until 7 days' time. So trying to forecast something that hasn't even formed and won't do for another week is bound to have a certain size of error bar in there. So you've got to take it with a certain amount of spread of expectations. So I try to keep it fairly generalised. So looking for sporadic E, I'm looking for jet streams, I'm looking for thunderstorms, things like that. And each one allows me to consider the things that might affect the propagation in those particular modes. And then getting it all together is attacking these sites, finding out what's going on, and then there we are, it all goes dark. And that's because I've come to the end. So, GB2RS, the VHF propagation report, is actually a quite long piece of work. You know, there's a good half an hour's worth of work for somebody who deals with it all the time. But the amount of stuff that goes into it is enormous. There's so much stuff out there that you could look at. And when I say you could look at, I mean you could look at it. All of those sites are out there and available, so you can get an easy heads up on what's going on. Anyway, I think that's enough. I think you've all withstood this very well, as Mr. Grace would say. So thank you for listening, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Jim. I was just actually typing that now onto BATC and to Facebook to remind everybody at home, but I can say it for real now, in person. So if you have any questions or comments for Jim, we've had quite a few things to read to you already, then please do it immediately and we'll read them to Jim as well as we get to them. I'll start with BATC, where we have more of a comment rather than a question, who says, hi Jim, I can remember listening to you reading the weather, and I would listen to hints that there may be a tropo opening by you commenting that TV broadcasts could receive continental interference. That would be a reason to nip into the shack and switch the 2 meter rig on 144.3 megahertz SSB and see what I could hear from the continent. Also, I can remember working a Dutch station from my back garden years ago. He was on the beach in Holland. I only found out later when I worked him again that he was also using a handheld. This was simplex, not through a repeater, and that was on 2 meters. So yeah, those days of analog TV, you could get cross-channel interference, couldn't you?
Yeah, it happened quite often. I know in my national BBC days, when I'd call by the office to find out from the duty editor how long I had for the broadcast that I was then about to go and do, he'd say, well, he said, your normal 1 minute 30 seconds, but I'll give you an extra 30 seconds if you apologise about the weather conditions and the interference people are getting. So it was a good trade-off. I was happy with that. So got a little bit more time for the weather bulletin, but also could give the nod to the amateurs on 2 meters and so on. So yeah, that was that happened surprisingly often actually, but I guess these days we don't really get that very often.
I was going to say, I'm glad you made reference like this, because to many, or some at least, who not watched and heard your talks before, they may not know that when you were a weatherman on TV, you did used to give that unique symbol, which was really aimed at radio amateurs, to give them a hint that to get on their rigs, yeah?
Yeah, there was also, I remember one of the presenters I worked with. Do you remember Desmond Lynham?
Oh yes, the sports guy. Yeah.
We worked with him a lot. Nice, really nice man, and he always had a scratching of the earlobe. That was his signal for getting the gallery to do. So everybody who does that job always has a separate signal to say, "Oh, time to do something else." Set something up or run a piece of tape or whatever.
Oh, good. Yeah, when you couldn't do it. Well, on radio is very different, isn't it? Because you can make all sorts of hand signals.
Yeah.
Not that we're in anything league like that, but actually Tammy and I do have hand signals, not bad hand signals that we do here. I better not let daylight into, what do they call it? Daylight into magic. But we do, even when I'm talking to you now, I can make some signals to Tammy that suggest maybe to bring us both together, for example. So I'll do that, and it's not that way round, to Tammy, and she knows to give it a two shot. So anyway, yeah, I'm sure everybody does things like that. But let's get back to the questions that you've started asking me, but please do comment and ask questions now if you can. So firstly, Ralph says, "Dear Jim, thank you as always for your wisdom and knowledge. As a simple, humble Scotsman, can you help? Sometimes I struggle to reach Europe or the USA on various frequencies. How come that the brave folk flying around the moon this week can have clear radio comms with Earth? I'm sure they do not have the massive antenna such as you and I have. Why do Earth atmospherics not seem to concern transmissions from beyond the moon? As your lecture continued, men observations become more discombobulated."
Well, I mean, I'm sure it's a very much a line of sight thing, So they're actually going directly down from where the spacecraft is down to Earth, vertically through the atmosphere to a ground station somewhere. It won't always be the one in America, because that will be, depending on the spin of the Earth, that will not be facing the spacecraft necessarily. So they'll have all sorts of locations where they can get the thing by looking fairly up. So you go through a vertical slice of the atmosphere, you have less reason to distort the thing, and the signal is spending much less time than in the problem area through inversions and things than if it were going nearly horizontally. So, and I suspect they run a little bit more power than just a handheld. But I don't know. That's a really good question. That sort of space radio type stuff would be an interesting talk in itself. Nice work, Ralph. That'll be your. You'll have to come up and do something on that.
I was going to say, come on, Ralph, let's do your research, and we'd love to know. I mean, I think it's probably as well got something to do with frequency. I imagine they're using quite high frequencies compared to what we use.
I would think it's gigahertz.
Where it's sort of much more line of sight, and as you say, all of the signal and all the power goes upwards. But what do I know? Maybe you know. If you do know, then pop it onto the chat on either Facebook or BATC now, or Ralph will do his research, I'm sure, and come back to us and explain it next time. From Mike M7TTT, he says, "My very first DX was 12 WLSB, I imagine that might be 12 watts LSB, to John in New Rochelle, New York State in 1979. We had a beautifully clear 20-minute chat and swapped QSL cards. That was me hooked." That was what Mike said. I didn't think he was that licensed that long though. So the 1979 reference, maybe I've misread it. I'm sorry if I have, Mike. That's on Facebook anyway. Paul Gunther, "Hi Jim, do you think the chemicals they are using in geoengineering are affecting the propagation for amateurs?"
Well, I don't really know what these engineering. I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
No, I'm wondering geoengineering. I'm wondering if that refers to things, like plants and growing things like that. I don't know, or maybe like CFCs would give off, going into the atmosphere. I don't know. Paul, if you've got a moment, can you just give us a quick explanation? Just update us what you really mean by that question. What chemicals you're talking about with geoengineering? Actually, Tammy's just found something online that says geoengineering or climate engineering refers to deliberate large-scale interventions in the Earth's natural systems to counteract climate change. Does that help?
Oh, right. Yeah, well, I don't. To be honest, I mean, a lot of people talk of these things, and I don't really know anything about it per se. I mean, there's we're using chemicals in all sorts of places around the planet. The things that we've just been talking about here are to do with the sporadic E. Anyway, it's good to hear from Paul, and the sporadic E bit is more what comes in from outside of Earth. So it's not like it's something we've done. It's like the material that's left over when meteors burn up. So that's outside our control, and that's what determines the sporadic E. For tropo, it's a case of gradients of, very often a lot of what happens in physics and the atmosphere and things, all the interesting stuff happens on gradients, sharp transitions from one concentration of something to another. So with tropo, it's to do with gradients of moisture in the atmosphere. So going from very moist things to very dry things, and that will cause a refraction. So I'm not sure that I can think of any of these other chemicals that are coming into the equation that would affect the propagation things.
I mean, he's just added a thing, chemtrails there. I mean, I'm not sure that helps you
Oh,
really.
oh,
Does that
right.
help?
Well, chemtrails is a term. Sorry, I'm being a bit dense. I should have got to that. Chemtrails are what some people call vapor trails from aircraft.
Oh, right.
So vapor trails from aircraft. It's mainly a water as a byproduct, which then condenses in the very cold atmosphere, which is, it has to be nearly saturated, the air. So if it's a very moist layer of air that in the ordinary world would produce cirrus cloud, and you add an extra bit of moisture that comes out of burning a fossil fuel in the jet engine, then that extra bit of moisture will cause the air to reach saturation, and the moisture, the extra stuff, will condense and form a trail. So you don't always see them if the air is very dry, but there'll be chemicals in the exhaust as well. In the same way, if you look at the exhaust pipe of a car, you'll see water dripping out of it, but you'll also have the oxides and the pollutants from burning the
From the
fossil
fuel,
fuel.
yes.
So in that sense, it's a chemical trail, but I'm not sure that it's anything other than that. So do they affect sporadic E? No, I don't think they do. I think the tropopause, or the amount of moisture up there, is probably a signature of perhaps being near a jet stream, so it might control a bit more about where things are. But that's just a proxy for it. I mean, it's like saying, I can't look up there and tell you what the wind speed is at 30,000 feet just by looking. But if I see a jet stream in the form of the cirrus cloud or a vapor trail, then that allows me to say something about how quickly things are moving up there. But I can't see it being of anything impactful other than that.
Just a slight variation on it. I mean, using Paul's question as a sort of cue, most people, or let's say many people, accept that there is such thing as climate change. And since you've been studying both the weather and propagation for such a long time, have you seen changes in propagation that you think are linked to climate change?
Nothing that I'd want to say without having a direct measurement. You can have the thing is, let's go to the opposite side of the fence. Let's flip the coin and say, what about bad weather? And the business that everybody says it always rains in Manchester. And that's very harsh. I worked in Manchester for a lot of years doing programs, and I hardly ever had any rain in Manchester, and yet it becomes a sort of a folklore thing. So I remember Manchester as being a place that's quite nice and quite warm, and so on. So we have selective memory. So if you have a nice sunny day as a child, you remember it and you think, oh, summers were much hotter back then, because you're now more conscious of the days when it's not hot. But to get to the background to that question, I'm sure there are changes in the way the climate and the atmosphere is working, in that, say, for example, we talked of tropo, which depends upon high pressure. So are we going to find more blocked weather patterns with big highs sitting around for a long period of time? That could well be something that you could look at the stats on and see. I would expect there to be some signature for how perhaps winters are going to be more unsettled, or perhaps summers hotter and bigger blocking highs, or whatever. There will be things that come out in the climatological data that also have an indirect impact on some propagation stuff. So, for example, I said when you have a sporadic E descending node, this thing that comes down and you get your sporadic E coming down to about 100 kilometres, 90 kilometres, supposing you've warmed the planet and the atmosphere is much warmer, is it more expanded? So therefore, do you get more absorption and recombination at the bottom of the sporadic E layer? So will it see the lower level going up? Or is it that you get more radiation from the top of the atmosphere and it gets cooler and that bit shrinks? And so it's a much more complicated thing than a simple answer, but it's almost certain that if you change the stage, you will have a different response. I just couldn't tell you which way round it would be going. I did gather some stuff together, but it's not at the tip of my tongue at the moment, about effects of climate change on propagation. I'll have to see if I can find those slides somewhere.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
Certainly wasn't a silly question.
No, thank you very much, Paul, for that, and thanks for all your questions. It's lovely to have so many questions coming from you watching. Paul G3VPT says, several years ago when we were using 4 meters, I worked ZB2 VHF from a car park on the south coast with just a mobile setup. So again, I guess obviously a matter of propagation.
Sporadic E.
Sporadic E, yeah, that's the word I was trying to come up with.
Yeah, I would say that was almost certainly sporadic E.
Thank you. So got someone giving a shout out, by the way. Ian Gooch says, "Hey JB." So that's just,
Hi Ian.
we don't often do those, but it's
Come
good.
on, you get your license. Come on.
Oh yes, Ian, come on, definitely. From Mike G4DYC, your neighbour. Thanks for superb talk as usual, Jim. Reference transatlantic paths when we have a good opening to the USA and sometimes VE and Puerto Rico. QST and hams on the air, etc. tend to say it's multi-E's linked by tropo, etc. This refers to 6 meters. Do you think there could be some confusion from other types of propagation on 6 meters?
That's a good question. I mean, I didn't mention in my talk, but it's quite probable that when you have a VHF path, it is sometimes the case that more than one mode of propagation will be in place. So you could have a sporadic E path where at one end it comes down in a region of high pressure with an inversion and tropoducting. So you can get some extension. For multi-hot paths, I think the thing is also going to have an element of that, but some of the comments about it being needing tropo was because of the difficulty in imagining how many jet streams you have to play with to do that. The idea that, well, how can you possibly have 3 jet streams in exactly the right place? But yet we saw on one of those plots of jet stream circulation patterns that you can easily get that. And over the Atlantic, one of the things I did in one talk some while ago, where I was able to show that the chances of getting a path to the Caribbean on 6 meters depended a lot on the seasonal position. As you know, we have, just to set the scene here, in the winter, the jet stream across the Atlantic blows at a more southerly latitude through the Mediterranean. In the spring, it's a bit farther north, so it comes across Europe. And in the summer, it's up there to the top, going towards the Faroes and Iceland. So accepting that the climate as it changes through the year will alter the position of the mean wind position of the jet streams. Obviously meanders, but if you average it for a month or whatever, what you will find is that there are only certain months in the year when the conditions are more likely to be favourable for getting that third hop into the Caribbean. And I can't remember now whether it was the beginning of the season or the end of it. But there's one part, I think it's the beginning, but there's one part where if you go too far into the season, the winds for the third hop have become so light that you don't get any help from a jet stream produced gravity wave going up for the third hop. And you have to bear in mind as well, which is an interesting thing, that we talk about these paths to the States, but they're not that common on six. They happen, but they happen when there's a unique combination of events that means the individual points where it's triggered are relatively slow moving and can maintain that sort of three hop coincidence, if you like, of suitable points where you can make ease. It only takes one of the three to fail for the path not to be there. So it could be that's a question mark. That means it happens at some times of the year and not others. But also it's undoubtedly true that when you get on the edge of a continent and a big sea area like the Gulf of Mexico or the Caribbean or whatever, you can get sort of ducting effects, which particularly the eastern states, which may be more important at one end of the path. But I would think that with the heat of the water down there, it's more likely to be an unstable pattern, and I wouldn't think Tropo would be a major feature in that. But that's not to say it isn't something that happens infrequently. I think that's the best thing I can come up with for that.
All right, lovely, Jim, and thanks. One final question for you now, again from Mike G3YLA actually. Jim, started out as being tongue-in-cheek, but have you ever asked AI for a prediction or analysis post-event? PropQuest is very valuable. Do you think AI would make good use of all that and other data, etc.? Cheers, Mike.
Well, it could. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. I've recently been tinkering with what's it called, Claude, which is one of the LLMs, and asking that questions about coding and trying to fix some things I've got going on in PropQuest that I want to sort out. And the interesting thing is that they are becoming so good, but then there's always a point where it doesn't quite work out. But it's good to ask the question, and that's a really good. You'll have to do it, Mike, and let me know when I next give you a lift to the club. You can regale me of all the useful stuff you got from it. It's undoubtedly true that you will get some of this, but the only thing that I'd say is that the models, the AI, has to be trained on it, which means that the stuff has to be written down somewhere for it to learn from. It has to be accessible to it, and a lot of the sporadic E stuff is very much at the it's not quite magic, but it's at a stage where we're trying to pull the science together to see what the important ingredients are. Now, whether that's enough for it to come up with something solid is a good question. I must try it. Thank you for that, Mike. Good.
Yeah, I think AI, well, it is here to stay, isn't it? Let's face it, but you just got to take it with a bit of a pinch of salt, I think, and it's certainly garbage in, garbage out, if it, depending on what you're asking it. But anyway, I said it was the final question, but Ralph, our Scottish correspondent, has come back and said, thank you, Jim, for an excellent lecture. Hope we can further research the beyond the moon transmissions with our down to earth transmissions, frequencies and transmissions and power, etc. Jim, thank you very much for your time this evening. It's always a mammoth subject, but it's so important to our hobby because it being able to make the most of what's there, especially as now our propagation cycle is on the down, it means that we can make the most of our hobby. And we're very grateful for you explaining it all, and I'm sure we can all go away now and make a bit more of those propagation conditions. Jim,
Yeah,
thanks for...
well, at one point before I get switched off, I just wanted to say thanks to all the amateurs who submit their logs to the clusters and the various places that make it become visible when there's an opening. That is just so useful to see things unfolding in real time. And the second thing I should say, especially since Ian's watching, is that we really, as a group of amateurs, ought to be very grateful to WeatherQuest for letting us host our PropQuest website on there and allowing us access to the data that we need to make it work. So big up for WeatherQuest for that as well.
All right, thanks. So obviously Ian works for WeatherQuest, so thank you, Ian. And thank you again, Jim, for your time tonight and all that you give the community through PropQuest and all your other forecasts and everything that you do for us. Thanks a lot. We're really pleased as well and honoured to have you as part of our club too.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jim. There we are, and that does conclude tonight's NARC Live. Just a reminder what's coming up this week. On Saturday, we've got the Koblenz Sked. Once a month it comes up, and it's this Saturday at 10 o'clock, 7.123 megs, or talking on 145.250. On Sunday at 7 o'clock, the GB2RS News, also on GB3NB, and on Monday night, the Monday Night Net at 7:30 on GB3NB as well with Steve, G3YLA. Give that a look in, can you? Because there's only a few people joining it since Christmas, and we really want to get that going to how it was before. But that is almost it. Next Wednesday, as I said, we're meeting at the club, at the school, CNS, between 7 and 9:30 with a social informal and also Bright Sparks for our younger members. But that's it from us tonight. From Tammy, M0TC.
Bye-bye.
And from me, David, G7URP. Take care of yourselves. Look after each other. Bye-bye.